If you were to ask a random person on the street, who are the best marathoners on earth, you'd almost certainly hear one answer: the East Africans. Nowadays, they're synonymous with distance running, but until quite recently, there was another powerhouse on the global scene: the Japanese. This is the tale of how they conquered the endurance game and what led to them being dethroned. In other words, 日本のマラソンはなぜダメになったのか. So I've chatted before in a previous video about why Japanese marathoners and half marathoners are so much better than Western runners. If you don't believe me, then give that one a watch first, but it's undeniable, they're levels above us. But now it's time to look at the other side. So why don't we see the Japanese guys on podiums, winning global medals? Have they fallen off? And why have the East Africans in particular taken over? They're now the undisputed kings of the longer distances. Now I'm warning you, this is gonna get juicy. This will be by far my most controversial video today, because later in the video we'll be touching on topics like doping and how some of these world records are almost too good to be true. But let's take it back in time now to before, when the Japanese were on top. For the men, this was between the 60s and 80s. They were right up there in the world rankings, smashing out world records, picking up global medals. They were killing the game. So to pick out a few names, you had Toru Terasawa, who ran a 2:16 marathon back in the 60s, which at the time was a world record. So if only I'd been born a little bit earlier, that could have been my title. Then next up was Toshihiko Seko, who's still probably considered one of the best ever Japanese runners. He won Boston Marathon, London Marathon, Fukuoka, which at the time was probably the biggest marathon in the world, like an unofficial world champs. And he actually used to train right near where I live now. So I'm here at the start of the iconic Seko Loop, named after the great himself. It's a 1,325 meter lap, basically shaped like a big concrete track. And this is where Toshihiko Seko did basically all of his training: easy runs, intervals, tempos. He's got to be the king of the mental game because it is so unbelievably boring. But he'd come out here in the morning, smack out 12K, then knock out a 40K long run. Then he might come back later in the evening as well for a little 10K. He was all about just getting the work done, and it wasn't fancy, it wasn't glamorous. I mean, people say I'm a bit mental for hitting up your Yogi Park all the time, but at least I change it up. Like most of my easy runs, I'll hit a freestyle loop out in the city. I guess I'm just a bit soft. I need a bit more stimulation when I'm running. Now, Seko's two big rivals at the time were names that I've actually mentioned a few times on the channel. They're my unofficial mentors and coaches, the Soul Brothers. Takeshi and Shigeru, who were running in the 70s and 80s. They won multiple world marathons, and Shigeru ran a 2:09, which at the time was a world best. And if you've been watching the channel for a while, then you know his training inspired my Tokyo Marathon build that ended with a 2:14. So at the time, the Japanese men were the big dogs on the world scene, but then after the 80s, they started to fall off, and that's when the Japanese women stepped it up in the 90s and 2000s. They had some absolute killers as well, who were even more successful than the men. So Japan won marathon medals at 4 back-to-back Olympics, starting with Yuko Aramori. She won a silver in 1992 and then bronze 4 years later, and then stepped up Naoko Takahashi, who was the first woman to break the 2:20 barrier for the marathon, and then won gold in the Sydney Olympics. And recently, after finding out about her training, I bought her book, and it is crazy. This could be the Marathon Bible 2.0. Like how I followed Shigeru Sora's training for Tokyo, maybe for the next marathon, I'll have to take a leaf out of Takahashi's book, because she was the mileage queen. She was putting the men to shame. We're talking 300 plus kilometers a week, sometimes upwards of 200 miles. If anyone's doubting that high mileage works, then clearly take a look at her training. It's absolutely mental, like 20 to 30K in the morning, and then head out later for just a casual little 30 to 40K. And what makes this even more ridiculous is her training was light work compared to the next up, Mizuki Noguchi, who then won gold in Athens 2004. She apparently took it to an even higher level, so I don't even want to know what her training looked like. But all of these old school Japanese legends were following the basic principles of hammering the high mileage, mega long runs, like the Soul Brothers hitting 125K on a casual little jog one day when they were on a training camp in New Zealand. Then some other staples of the Japanese are triple days, so forget the double days, they've got to take it up a notch. Back-to-back session days, and just basically pushing your body to the limit, willing to kill yourself, break yourself for greatness. And that's something I can respect. I'd say I've got a similar philosophy. So I've been going all in on the running for these last 2 years and had remained completely injury-free, ending in a 2:14 marathon at Tokyo. But then after that was hit with my very first injury, which is a ridiculous run when you think about it. Like 99.9% of pro runners runners have had way more injuries than me, even though almost none of them are running the same mileage. So I'm not looking to slow down on the train harder, not smarter approach at all. And since the last video when I announced this knee injury that meant I had to take my very first rest period, things have been rapidly improving. Cool, I'm feeling nervous this morning. This is a big day. I've got a test to run. You're gonna see how my knee's feeling. I've now had 4 back-to-back rest days, and then I had another like 4 or so last week. So it's been a proper break, but I've been absolutely hammering the rehab exercises, all the explosive stuff, as well as doing long walks. Like yesterday, I put in about 4 hours of walking, and I managed to do all of that pain-free. So I've got to the point where I think it's time we roll the dice, go again. All right, wish me luck. Here we go. Oh geez. Okay, 200 meters down. All good so far. That's further progress than the last couple of attempts. The deal is that if I start feeling any pain, then I've got to stop straight away. So I'm trying to avoid the hills as much as possible, because the downhills are an absolute killer for my knee, because it just loads up the quad, it puts all that pressure on. So that means we're keeping it flat, and there's only one option for that. It's a Yogi Park classic. Oh geez, it feels good to be back here. The sun's shining. I need to fuel that running addiction. And I've been recommended to get on the softer surface, which I'm not complaining about. I love this little trail around Yogi, so give a bit more cushion to the knee. And we're all good so far, a couple K in. Now the trouble with me taking a week off running, it's gonna increase the chance of all other kind of injuries. I've always found if I miss any time or reduce the mileage, it's like my body just freaks out, it doesn't know what to do. And everything starts getting tight. So I'm actually feeling my back quite a lot already. I need to get back to those 200K weeks ASAP. So I made it through that run unscathed. The knee felt okay during it. We got 10K in, sort of 4:48 pace. Felt bloody hard though, yeah, that was a tough shift, that easy run pace. But I'm definitely not in the clear at all yet, because this has happened before, but then a little bit later, a couple of days on, that's when it's kicked in and started hurting. So I have to monitor it over the next kind of 24, 48 hours and see how we get on. And at the time of recording, we're still all good. No problems in the knee department. I've been building the mileage back up, but keeping the intensity very low. And so the comeback arc is well underway, and you'll have to follow along week on week to see how this progresses. Now back to the Japanese to talk about the fall off. So where did it all go wrong for them? And this actually ties in quite nicely to the Marathon Bible itself, my training guide, and how I learned about the actual training of some of the best old school runners. So the title of this book actually translates as Why the Japanese Marathon Went Wrong. So some of it's about the legends who were at the top of the game at the time, talking about why modern Japanese runners aren't the best in the world anymore. And it's stuff like the newer Japanese marathoners aren't training as hard, they aren't putting in the same work, they're more conservative with their training, they haven't been following the train harder, not smarter method. And I guess that might have a little bit of truth to it, because you don't really hear about modern day guys absolutely smacking these same like mental workouts that the old school boys were doing. Things like Seko's back-to-back intense days, or the Soul Brothers' insane long runs, 125K, or Takahashi, her crazy high mileage, 300K months. Those extreme methods seem like they've been left a little bit in the past, and that's what some of the guys in the book were blaming on. But I think one of the biggest factors here is the Ekiden. So these long distance relays, they're a blessing and a curse. The Japanese are absolutely obsessed with them. Other than an Olympic medal, I'd say winning the Hakone Ekiden is by far the most important thing for Japanese runners. Like when you've got 50 million people, half the country watching you, you win that race, you instantly become a rock star. I swear to God, I've seen it at races. You've got hundreds and hundreds of girls queuing up for autographs and pictures with these top Ekiden runners. They're literally like mini celebrities, and the emphasis on the Ekiden, I think, is why the Japanese have such depth. So all the university Ekiden teams, then the pro teams, you've got thousands of sort of semi-pro runners who are supported and sponsored to run. But because of that, the Japanese running scene's like its own little bubble. So all the competitions are within Japan, and they don't really care about what's going on outside. So stuff like marathon world majors and other competitions are less important. And it's all about training to peak for this January Ekiden season. Now, as well with these teams, a lot of the guys are probably working sort of 6 hours a week from 3, 4, even 5 days. So they're definitely not pro runners. And you can see that kind of being a limiting factor, so they can get to a really high level. But I think to get a compete with the absolute world's best right at the top, you can't be trying to work a day job as well, which is what 99% of the pro runners in Japan are doing. So they're definitely at a disadvantage advantage compared to runners in the West and I guess Africa as well, where their main focus is just running and they can get that full recovery and downtime in between sessions. But the thing is, the Japanese guys haven't actually got slower. They've progressed at a pretty steady rate. And outside of Kenya and Ethiopia, they're still definitely the best country in the world in terms of marathon and half marathon. The depth is absolutely ridiculous. And the top times, like their marathons down to a sub 205. And recently they had a couple guys break 60 for the half. So it's not like they're slacking. And I don't think it's really they've done anything wrong. It's more about the sudden dominance of the East African runners. And it's something I got to witness firsthand at one of the Ekiden races that I did last year. So the Ekiden teams have a token foreigner. So you're only allowed one on one leg of the relay. But it means that every team pretty much has a world-class Olympic level Kenyan or Ethiopian. And then there was me, the sole white guy, being absolutely annihilated by these East African runners. But I noticed just even in the warm-up area and then like seeing them out there, how they're just built for running. They make it look so easy. So even though I'm much taller than most of them, their hips were way higher than mine. And it means their legs are basically twice as long and half as wide. I've got these weaponly thunder thighs. I just look like a complete unit compared to these guys who just have like really thin calves, short torsos, super low body fat. And there's been a whole bunch of research into it, but a lot of the genetics that they naturally possess are ideal for running. But then it goes way further than just that. So there's also the environmental factors. So they have a much cleaner diet compared to Westerners, like much more simple, natural foods. They also have way less distractions and can focus much more heavily on running because of the more simplistic lifestyle there. And then of course you've got the altitude. So being born at that high altitude just gives you a massive boost in red blood cells. But of course that's not the only thing boosting their red blood cells. So I'm gonna put out a warning before this next section. If you're a doping apologist or you just wanna live with your head in the sand, then it's probably best to switch off the video now. I'm just simply gonna be presenting the information, giving you the facts. And then if you wanna unsubscribe, leave a load of hate comments, that's absolutely fine by me. Now let's get into the juicy stuff. So the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, they have a list of current banned athletes. And there's a clear top 3 countries that stand out. We've got Russia with 73 athletes currently serving a ban. And they obviously had the statewide doping operation that then got busted and they got banned from the Olympics, like a countrywide black mark put over them because it was just completely out of control there. But then in second place, we've got India with 108 athletes. And I guess a lot of people might not realize how bad in India it is because we don't see those guys competing right at the top, like on podiums and for medals, but they've been completely taking the piss with doping. There was a hilarious story I read about the Delhi State Athletics Championships. So all the best runners were meant to be competing there. And then someone tipped them off that WADA, so the World Anti-Doping, were going to be there and they were going to be testing athletes after the race. So when this news got out, it ended up in the 100 meters, there was only one person that entered. So every other runner suddenly backed out at the last minute because they realized, yeah, I'm juiced up to the gills. I'm going to get popped after this race if the testers are here. And they just decided, no, we're giving it a miss. And there's clearly a systematic problem there. But then top of the pile is Kenya with 119. But then there's been hundreds and hundreds more over the last decade that have served bans and now come back to sport. And from listening to interviews and stories about people who have been caught and people in the know, it's so unbelievably easy to be one step ahead of the testers that even if they are testing, 99% of the people doping are getting away with it. Like they can cycle the drugs in and out, they can microdose. So I'm sure we'll have some people crying about, oh, but there's testing at the Olympics. They can't be doping. No, it's just they have to be an absolute moron to get caught. They're doing it the whole training camp, cycling in and out, and then just coming off right at the end to dodge the testers. And it seems like at the moment, nearly every week, a new Kenyan runner gets popped. We recently had Kibiwott Kandi, who was the ex-half marathon world record holder and had won a whole load of global medals. Yet he got done. No surprises there. That's the problem at this point. It just comes as no shock to anyone when a new runner gets done. So I'd be all for a blanket ban, just like with Russia. I think that India and Kenya, there's clearly some systematic doping here. There's people on the inside, doctors, people in high up organizations that are orchestrating this stuff. Because it's not like the athletes are just sorting it themselves. There's definitely some higher up parties. Now bringing it back to Japan. So on the other hand, they have a grand total of 0 people on the banned list. After living here for a year and a half, that comes as absolutely no surprise at all. The culture here is all about honor, respect, and the damage if you got caught, I think would just be irreversible. irreversible. You'd be completely shunned, outcast from the country. Whereas from what I've heard, the Kenyans that do get popped, they're not exactly disgraced back home. They've earned a ton of money for their families, they're helping people escape poverty, and they never even have to pay the money back. So it doesn't seem like there's really any repercussions there. Whereas the social damage in Japan, I just think would be horrendous. And there's testing at all the major races here, but still no Japanese runner has been done. So you can see what a disadvantage they're at if all their top runners are completely clean, doing it the honest, hard-working way, and then they're trying to compete against people who are on a cocktail of sauce. EPO, testosterone, the works, all those performance-enhancing drugs. Then it doesn't matter how talented and hard-working the Japanese are, they're just never going to be able to compete. So the more you learn about the professional running scene, it's a pretty sad state of affairs. And it just makes you more skeptical. It makes it really hard to trust anyone when you see these absolutely ridiculous times coming out. Now, let me be clear. I think even without the drugs, the Kenyans would still be the best in the world. That combo of genetics, environment, training means that I'm sure they'd still be at the top, but it would be a much more even playing field. The gap would be significantly smaller. Maybe we'd still see some of the Japanese guys medaling and on podiums, but I want to know what you guys think, because I know this is a spicy topic. I'm sure there's a lot of strong opinions out there. So leave them in the comments. Let's have a discussion here. Why do you think the Japanese have fallen off? And why do you think the East Africans are unbeatable at the moment? But this has been Jake with Run to Japan. I'll catch you in the next one. Remember, train harder, not smarter.